Assalamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new to the Speak From Within podcast. I am your host Nasra. I'm very grateful to have you guys all joining me for today's episode. Today's topic is actually inspired by a comment that I received on one of my videos from one of our sisters. She said, "Can you make a video on how to stop procrastination and daydream as a Muslim?" Jazakallah khair for your comment. This comment really opens up in a very important conversation that is necessary within our community and how to deal with it in a way that is pleasing to Allah SWT. In order to approach this topic in the most effective way, I'm going to break this episode down into two parts. The first part will be dedicated to developing our self-awareness of what procrastination is, where does it come from, why do we procrastinate, how does it look like in my life, and how does it affect my relationship with Allah SWT. Then the second part of this video is going to be where I share tips and tricks and a few mindset shifts as well that are necessary to overcome procrastination and develop ourselves as Muslim women to bring ourselves closer to Allah SWT, because ultimately that's our goal, right? The first part of the episode is just as critical as the second part. The first step in fixing anything, the first step in change and growth is always self-awareness. You can't fix something unless you know something. So let's just get straight into the episode. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So what exactly is procrastination? To answer this question, I want to use a hadith from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, where he said, "A wise person is the one who holds themselves accountable and does noble deeds that benefit them after death. And the foolish one is the one who follows his own short-term desires and temptations and seeks the help of Allah SWT." From this hadith, we can easily understand that procrastination is linked to us following our own short-term desires, not holding ourselves accountable, and delaying the preparation of the future that's inevitably going to come. How many of us had an exam to study for, yet we waited till the last minute to start studying and pulled several all-night tried to cram everything in, and then when we had no more time to study for, we said, okay, I'm going to put my trust in Allah. The Messenger ﷺ is describing that kind of behavior. So if procrastination has the potential to either make or break you in this dunya, then why do we procrastinate? Well, there are a few reasons that people procrastinate. The first and most common reason that people procrastinate is because that they're so overwhelmed or intimidated by the task that's at hand. For example, someone might have to study for a final exam, but they're so intimidated by the amount of material that they have to go over and revise and look over. What's going on in their head is, I have to review so much of my notes, I have to watch so many lectures, that they just continue putting it off and say, I'll do it later. Another reason that a person might procrastinate is because they are subconsciously afraid of change, whether they realize it or not. They desire to change and they want to change and they say they're ready to change, but something is holding them back. That fear of changing and doing things that they've never done before is holding them back a little. And so they resort to short-term desires like binge watching TV shows or even daydreaming about that lifestyle that they want to live, because it's easier and it's comfortable and it doesn't require that change that's necessary. Another reason that a person might procrastinate is due to their own limiting beliefs or self-doubt. Someone might convince themselves that they can't do a certain thing, maybe because they've already tried, or maybe because of a certain circumstance in their life that makes them think that their dreams are too big. So internally they're saying to themselves, why would I try? This is too big. I can't do this. And so they resort to putting things off and say, what's the point? I'll just do it later. It's a very negative mentality. Can you guys relate to any of these reasons? I personally have experience with each one of these, and I'm sure there's many other reasons that people procrastinate, but these are the few that I see as the most common. So how does this affect my life now, and how does it affect my relationship with Allah SWT? Well, procrastination has the potential to cause someone to develop qualities that shaitan loves to see in a person. For example, low confidence, self-doubt, a feeling of hopelessness, negative self-talk, and overthinking, which eventually leads to low iman and distancing yourself from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is ultimately the goal of shaitan. If you want to boil down where procrastination comes from, essentially it's the whispers of shaitan. But like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said once, narrated in hadith, all praises be to the one who has reduced the plots of shaitan to mere whispers. We have the potential and the power to overcome this concept of procrastination, contrary to what shaitan wants you to believe. If we look into the life of our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we will see that he used to recite a dua every morning and every evening to protect himself from procrastination, laziness, anxiety, and so many other things. I want you to save this dua, screenshot this dua, make it your lock screen, whatever you need to do to internalize it and recite it frequently, as often as you need to, but at least twice a day. The dua is, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi wal-hazan وأعوذ بك من العجز والكسل وأعوذ بك من الجبن والبخل وأعوذ بك من غلبة الدين وقهر الرجال. O Allah, I seek your protection from anxiety and grief. I seek your protection from inability and laziness. I seek your protection from cowardice and miserliness. And I seek your protection from being overcome by debts and being overpowered by men. The Messenger ﷺ, the best of creations, who used to recite this dua frequently twice a day. If that's the best of creations, how frequently should we be reciting this dua? And with that dua being the first tip on combating procrastination, let's get into the second part of the video. After that dua, the second tip I have for stopping procrastination is breaking down our goals into smaller tasks. Like we mentioned earlier, the most common reason that people procrastinate is because they're intimidated by the large tasks that they have to do. For example, we just finished Ramadan and we may have picked up so many beautiful habits that we want to maintain. But a task like that can be daunting to somebody, which leads them to putting it off and procrastinating and eventually losing the habits that they wanted to maintain in the first place. We learn from the infamous hadith of the Messenger ﷺ, where he says that Allah SWT loves actions that are consistent no matter how small they are. So I know you want to change overnight. I want to change overnight too, but the truth is we're not designed that way. The Messenger ﷺ here is telling us that slow and steady is going to win the race to Allah SWT. And while we are taking it slow, we're also gaining the love of Allah SWT. And honestly, what is greater than Allah's love? The next tip I have to stop procrastination is developing a strong why. This one is a bit of a mindset shift, honestly, because it does require you to ask yourself a few important questions and figuring out why are you doing what it is that you want to do. Is that why, is that reason strong enough to pick you up on those days that you don't feel like getting out of bed or you don't feel like accomplishing the tasks that you set for yourself? It may be a dunya related reason, but is it tied back to the pleasure of Allah SWT? Because the truth is motivation is going to fade, and I definitely learned this the hard way. I thought motivation could get me all the way to my dreams and my goals, but I quickly realized that Allah SWT is the only one who can get us to where we want to go. In His mercy, He judges us not by our actions but by our intentions. So on those days where it feels like it's difficult to get out of bed, you remember that Allah SWT rewards anybody who struggles in His cause. Although it may be difficult, seeking the reward and the pleasure of Allah SWT. Allah SWT is Al-Wahhab. He's the endless gift giver. He gives because of who He is, not because of who we are, and that becomes something that you can lean on those days where motivation may or may not be there. Ultimately, Allah SWT is always there. So what is your why? And have you developed it to be strong enough? And if you haven't developed one, the good news is you can start right now. The best way to do this is journaling, asking yourself questions, or even just having a conversation with Allah SWT through dua or through prayer if you want to. While you're in sujood, just having a conversation with Him, and Allah SWT will assist you throughout the way. The next tip I have to stop procrastination is to hold yourself accountable. Like we learned from the hadith that we shared in the beginning, where the Messenger ﷺ stated the difference between a wise person and a foolish person. We can learn that self-discipline in of itself is a form of ibadah, a form of worship to Allah SWT. Holding ourselves accountable can look like many different things. On the one hand, we can reward ourselves whenever we complete a task or goal that we set for ourselves. And on the other hand, we can hold ourselves accountable by not following our own short-term desires, especially when we haven't completed the goals that we stated we were going to complete. For example, I was listening to a podcast by Qalam Institute by Sheikh Abdurrahman Murphy. He gave an example and he said, if you don't wake up for Fajr prayer, don't give yourself that cup of coffee. Because most of us, that cup of coffee is a form of pleasure for us. But when we reward ourselves with that cup of coffee, even when we haven't prayed Fajr on time, what does that tell our body, and how does that affect our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And building a reward system for yourself may look like saying to yourself, okay, I have this assignment to complete, or I want to read 10 pages of Quran every day, or I want to study Arabic. Whatever your goal is, set a doable goal, a doable task for you to do every single day. And when you accomplish that, you can say to yourself, okay, I've accomplished it, so I can go hang out with my friends, I can use my phone, I can scroll on social media, or I can go to take a nap. Whatever form of pleasure it is for you, build that reward system within your routine. A reward system like this makes it easier for us to develop good qualities like self-kindness and positive self-talk while making progress towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As well as holding ourselves accountable when we don't complete our tasks or our goals prevents us from becoming foolish. Like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ stated, that the foolish person is one who follows his short-term desires and then seeks the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by holding ourselves accountable, we're able to become successful in this world and in the next world, and be the wise person that the Messenger ﷺ stated in that hadith. The next tip to stop procrastination is pretty obvious, but it's to remove all distractions that are preventing you from doing what it is that you want to accomplish. For example, social media can be a very big distraction for us if it's not used properly. You may say to yourself, okay, I'm only going to scroll on social media for 5 minutes. Then before you know it, 2 hours have passed and you haven't done anything yet. So to prevent this from happening, what I do is I move my phone into another room and I set a specific time for myself to complete my task, whether it's 1 hour or 2 hours, and I say I'm going to get this done, and when I complete it, I can use my phone. Removing distractions so I can get my work done, as well as incorporating that reward system so that it's easier for me to stay focused and I have something to look forward to after I'm done. We know ourselves the best and we know what distractions we have, whether it's friends or social media or our bedroom, whatever it is. Find a way to remove that distraction while you're working and then use it as a reward system when you finish. The last tip I have to stop procrastination is acknowledging that change is hard. The ayah that comes to my mind is where Allah SWT in Surah Al-Ra'd says that indeed Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. We desire to change, we desire to do better for the sake of Allah SWT, but due to our own weaknesses we fall short a lot of the times. So acknowledging this and increasing ourselves in the remembrance of Allah SWT, keeping our tongue moist with the dhikr of Allah SWT throughout the day while we are trying to better ourselves for His sake, can be our way of saying, yeah Allah, I want to change for your sake, I desire to change for your sake, and I have no helper besides you, so please help me change, ya Allah. And inshallah, Allah will assist us throughout the way. And I will end with a beautiful, well-needed reminder where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is narrating what Allah SWT Himself said. I am just as my slave thinks of me, and I am with him if he remembers me. If he remembers me in himself, I too remember him in myself. And if he remembers me in a group of people, I remember him in a group that is better than they. And if he comes one span nearer to me, I go 1 cubit nearer to him. And if he comes 1 cubit nearer to me, I go a distance of 2 outstretched arms nearer to him. And if he comes to me walking, I go to him running. And in another narration, Allah SWT says, whoever meets me with enough sins to feel the earth, not associating any partners with me, I will meet him with as much forgiveness. Subhanallah. What other words can I possibly say that are better than this? Allah SWT does not want perfection from you. He wants your effort, and that is good enough for Allah. And inshallah, you and I both can strive towards Allah SWT with the few tips and mindset shifts that I shared in this episode, no matter how small the steps are, all while gaining the love of Allah SWT. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode, and I hope to see you in the next one. Assalamu alaikum.
قال قد أوتيت سؤلك يا موسى ولقد مننا عليك مرة أخرى